It is my sincere pleasure to bring in someone who has lived through one of the most tumultuous couple of years at the head of a company at the epicenter of all of the disruption. Éric Martel joining us now, the CEO and president of Bombardier, who joined in March of 2020 as CEO and president. And I want to start there. Over the past 2 years, how wild has this ride been?
I have to admit, Lisa, it's been quite a journey, especially right from the start where, I always say day one on the job, I had 47 facilities all shut down because of COVID around the world. And at the time, we were still in the transportation business. So it was quite a challenge. Our customer on both sides were extremely concerned. Remember, on the aircraft side, aircraft were grounded. Nobody was flying. And we had delivery to do in our plan. So airplanes were already built. So there was a lot of concern. But, sometimes you get lucky also, but we were able and successful to achieve 3 major M&A transactions during that year, with the last one, the biggest one being at the end of January 2021, selling our train division. But so it was a major restructuring. But at the same time, we started to see interesting signs during the summer of 2020, where private aviation was becoming more and more popular. The airline were grounded still. The private jet industry started to recover there. And we went from, not flying at all to observing, especially with the fleet operator. I'm thinking here NetJet, VistaJet, FlexJet, operating, more and selling more than they ever did before. So all this together to say we went from, I may want to cancel my order early in the year to let's see what's happening here. And a couple of months later, can we get more airplane?
So let's bring that to now, because we had a couple of years where people were really favoring private jets in order to avoid the masks and the chaos of domestic travel in a more public setting. Where are we now in terms of that evolution?
Yeah. We had a lot of people that I think, first of all, during the pandemic, realized that flying private jet costs money, of course, but it's not that much more expensive than flying on a first flight, on a commercial airplane. But on top of it, you decide what time you leave. You have full control over the schedule, but also safety-wise, you fly either with your colleague, with your family, instead of walking on board an airplane with, a couple of hundred people. So I think a lot of people tried private aviation, and we see a stickiness right now. People stay with private aviation and they continue to fly despite the fact that, the airline are resuming. So interesting. And growth. Clearly.
And growth as well?
We've seen growth. And we've seen when you look at the flight hours today, they are higher by around 15 to 20% compared to pre-COVID hours of flight.
Wow. So there also is the issue of making the business work in an era of supply chain disruptions and labor prices that are going up, and the inflationary regime, borrowing costs going up. I mean, seriously, I can't imagine a more complicated situation to be thrown into a tumultuous bunch of years, again, to go back to the beginning of the interview. So as you look out over the next couple of years, what's the big innovation, the big challenge that you see coming up?
Yeah, clearly, you're probably aware we're working on what we call the EcoJet. So I think having a more environmentally friendly product will clearly be, an enabler for more success in the future in the private aviation sector. So as an example, we Bombardier are working on a new design shape of an airplane right now that could reduce just by itself roughly close to 20% the emission. This is without using a different fuel. This is without using different engine. But overall, when you combine, we are seeing a path today that we could reduce our emission by roughly 50%. Private aviation, the entire aviation industry is about 2% of all emission. If you look at private aviation, it's 0.05%. We can say, oh, it's not that much, but I think we all need to contribute and do better. That's why today, at Bombardier, we spend the majority of our R&D budget in making sure we design the future airplane that are going to be more sustainable.
Is it hard to source the material at prices that are in line with what you wanted to spend at a time when we're talking a lot about the inflationary environment, particularly in commodities?
Yeah, clearly it's been a challenge. It hasn't been a walk in the park for sure for the last 2 years in that regard. But first of all, we have very solid contract at Bombardier, most of them protected by indices, but also cap. So on the inflation. So we are basically covered for most of it. But at the same time, we see labor challenges. We see the same thing that pretty much everywhere we see in the world right now. And we've been able to do a fairly good job. On the supply chain side, we were probably the first OEM about 2 years ago, instead of cutting people, redeploying more people in the supplier base to make sure we monitor, all the parts that we were, ordering to build our jet. But at the same time, we did a few other things. Like one of them was to be proactive in looking forward, but we also brought back, work on some of our suppliers that we were not sure, a bit insecure about their ability to get through the pandemic. So we brought back the equivalent right now in Montreal. We have about created 500 jobs just of work that we brought back in to get better control over our supply chain.
That raises a question about reshoring or nearshoring. We've been hearing a lot about that. It sounds like you've been engaged with that to some degree. Where are you bringing the jobs back from, and how much more is there to do on that front?
Yeah. But I think, as I said, we created about 500 jobs here in Montreal, a few more also in Mexico. Right now, we are targeting also to increase it. So clearly, ensuring is part of our strategy right now. We've been doing some of it in the last 2 years, but we're going to probably do more. Our responsibility is to make sure we do protect our supply chain, and make sure also we manage the costs associated to that. So clearly, Mexico will also be, we've been very successful in Mexico. We have 1,400 people at our facility today, and we're going to grow that capability.
How has it challenged the business with fuel prices where they are? I mean, they've come down recently, but this feeling that perhaps people would curtail their travel, does that apply to the private jet set, or does it basically have nothing to do with it because they're more price insensitive?
Yeah. No, there's not that price sensitivity, as you said, mainly from our customer base. So we haven't seen any sign right now because of the fuel price, going up of reduction, especially in the private sector. We've seen more an increase, as I said, compared to pre-COVID, where we're in the range of, 20%-ish of more flying hours.
There's a lot of predictions of recession, of global downturn, especially with the rate hiking from central banks globally. How much does this lack of price sensitivity when it comes to fuel prices relate to just demand in general for private jets?
Yeah. We redesigned our business 2 years ago and restructure in a way that, we have a bit of a protection on this. The type of customer we have on the global platform, as an example, I was around in 2008 to 2009. We actually delivered 20% more jet in 2009 compared to 2008. So this is a market. Today, we've been successful at Bombardier to build roughly 2 years of backlog on any platform, meaning that even if our book-to-bill ratio goes down next year, we're still going to have a very healthy backlog, of maybe 18 months if I'm taking the example of a ratio at 0.5. So we are in a good place, and that's how you manage that business. You need to make sure you got enough backlog, but we are prepared today to go through a recession if ever that hit. But right now, we don't have any sign of a slowdown in the industry.
What about when it comes to, you mentioned this earlier, some of the labor pressures and finding people and paying them what they are asking for? Have you found it difficult to hire enough qualified workers given the competition right now?
Yeah, it's quite a challenge, but we've been successful at Bombardier. I think our story is pretty clean right now of what we are. We're in the private aviation sector. I think people like that, we've been able to attract over 2,000 people since the beginning of the year. Yes, we may have lost some, but clearly, we've been increasing our number of employees. So I think the company has become very attractive. We've been successful in the last 2 years on all front. We've reduced our debt, as quite substantially this year. We've been, having great results since the beginning of this year and even last year. We are in line to meet our 2025 financial performance target. And, we've launched the Global 8000. We just delivered last week the Challenger 3500 first airplane. So, we got a lot of momentum here right now, and we're building for the future, for the long run. So this helps attracting people, but it is a challenge. We still have about 1,000 people to hire today, and about 400 of that are technicians in the service center, which we are also growing this year by 1 million square feet.
Wow. What's the biggest challenge for you when it comes to retention and attracting employees? Is it just the lack of sufficient training for individuals? Is it demands for pay? Is it demands for certain work-life balances? What's the actual tipping point that you found that could help retain and attract employees?
The main one has been salary and compensation. And I think we've been flexible. We've made numerous changes since the beginning of the year. Not everybody is looking for the same thing depending on where you are in your life. Some prefer to have a bigger salary, some better benefit coverage. So we've been extremely flexible in making sure that we can offer different things, that we don't have just a one solution fits all type of approach. So that's been very helpful so far this year in being able to attract people and retain our people, of course.
When you talked about how Bombardier has been reducing debt, it raises an issue with respect to the path forward and interest rates generally. When the Bank of Canada has been out front with a lot of the rate hikes, although everyone else is following behind. So it's not as if they're alone. At what point does this become a challenge for you, not only in retiring existing debt and rolling it over at a higher expense, but also in being ambitious about future acquisitions, projects, expenditures?
Yeah. I think we've been extremely clear since the beginning that reimbursing debt was the top priority. So when we do capital allocation in the organization right now, that's the priority. So far this year, we reimburse roughly $800 million, close to $800 million US of debt. And we've created, that was part of the strategy, runway for the next maturity. So we don't have a maturity right now until December 24. And another one in 25. So we got plenty of time, and the cash flow of operation is very solid. So we will continue to reduce our debt, and the market has gonna have time to go into a recession and even come back, and we're well positioned because our cash flow of operation with 2 years of solid backlog is also in a very good position right now. So clearly, we've put the measure in place like in the last 2 years to make sure that we can get through a recession, because that was definitely a potential scenario, but we are today in that position. So runway is in front of us. We got plenty of time, and the business is generating very nice cash flow right now.
Let's say interest rates and benchmark borrowing costs for big corporations do not decline dramatically by 2024. Would it still be feasible to borrow money at the rates they are today versus when you borrowed, considering that in some cases they've doubled?
Mm-hmm. But it's always a possibility that the rates will be higher in 2024. And that, I don't know, I can speculate that. But at the same time, I think what we've been saying is that we have, a possibility just with our operational cash flow to be able to reimburse that debt ourselves. And we've been at it, as I said, since the beginning of the year. And we still have 2 years ahead of us to be able to cope with, 2 tranches of roughly $500 million.
So for the future of aviation, how much of it do you think will be the private jet sphere, just to sort of put a bow on this, versus where it is now?
The industry has a lot of momentum. Every fleet operator, there's pretty much no used aircraft available. I think if we're all disciplined also, not to increase the rate by too much. Anyway, the supply chain is constraining us right now. I think there's a way to manage our backlog and keeping a certain length of backlog despite, some turbulence that we can face. And if we have that discipline, I don't see any reason why that business is not going to continue to go on. And that's what the trend is. As I said, the pandemic was a bit of an accelerator of what we thought was going to happen in 7 to 10 years, but it just happened in 2 years because of the pandemic.
When was the last time that you flew public transportation?
It's been a while so far, but about a year ago. So far I've been able to fly, visiting our customer all around the world with our private jet, because we need to demo our product also at the same time. So,
well, hopefully, a lot of people can demo the jet in a lot of different ways. Thank you so much for spending the time, Éric Martel,
Thanks,
Bombardier.